Good morning. I call to order the informal meeting to conduct an interactive dialogue with Ms. Rebeca Grynspan Mayufis, a candidate for the position of the United Nations Secretary General. The interactive dialogues mark a critical step in the selection and appointment process for the next Secretary General, while also coming at a pivotal moment for the United Nations. The person we select will be more than the face of this institution. Our choice will send a powerful message about who we are and whether we truly serve all 8 billion people of the world in all their diversity. The multilateral system with the United Nations at its center is under unprecedented political and financial pressure. From a deepening liquidity crisis to fundamental principles of the UN Charter being put into question. The next Secretary General will be entrusted not only with navigating these challenges, but also with advancing essential reforms to ensure the United Nations is fit for the future. At the same time, the world needs the United Nations more than ever, and it needs a Secretary General who can provide strong, principled and effective leadership across all three pillars: peace and security, sustainable development and human rights. These interactive dialogues, which I convene in line with General Assembly Resolution 79/327, offer a unique opportunity for candidates to present their vision for the future of this organization and for member states and civil society to ask questions and interact directly with candidates. The interactive dialogues are essential to ensuring a transparent and inclusive selection and appointment process while underlining the important role of the General Assembly. I encourage each of you to make full use of this opportunity and thank all candidates for their active participation. Member states and civil society for their question and engagement, and encourage solidarity between member states to be short and sharp. But these dialogues do not end in this chamber. They are also an opportunity for people around the world, the very people the United Nations serves, to listen, to engage, and to hold this process to the highest standards. For this decision does not only concern a few, but all of us in and outside the United Nations who look to this institution to reflect the principles and values it champions. While we hear the candidates individually, a town hall format will follow later in the process, as announced yesterday. As I reflected in my letters dated March 4th and April 15th, 2026, the dialogue will begin with an introduction by the candidate of their vision and priorities for up to 10 minutes, followed by an interactive exchange. Each interactive dialogue will last up to 3 hours. The interactive exchange will take place in 2 segments. We will begin with a 1.5-hour discussion focused on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. Following this, we will move into the second segment, which will focus on the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights. In line with Revitalization resolution, civil society representatives will be invited to pose questions in each of the 2 thematic segments. Before proceeding to hear the presentation of the vision of the candidates, I would like to inform members on how to inscribe to speak in the 2 thematic segments. Delegations wishing to speak can register their wish to speak by pressing the microphone button. As said yesterday, please do not press the microphone button yet. I will announce when delegation will be asked to press the microphone button at the beginning of this segment, and please, if it has turned green, don't press again. Member states speaking on behalf of a group are invited to approach a list of speakers table and will be given priority. Delegations can speak only once in each segment, whether on behalf of a group or a national capacity. In the second segment, priority will be given to delegations that did not have an opportunity to speak during the first segment. By this, I now invite Ms. Grynspan to present her vision. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. To stand before this assembly is to declare faith in the Charter, in its refusal to normalize human suffering, in its defense of human dignity, and in its promise to save future generations from the scourge of war. Para mí,
For me, the United Nations Charter is the foundation. Peace is what made it possible for my parents, 2 refugees from the Second World War, to find respect and dignity in a small country, Costa Rica. And they rebuilt their lives. I am the daughter of this peace, a demonstration of what peace makes possible and the principles which underpin that.
because that peace is in peril, because trust in the organization is waning, and because time is running out to restore it. I have devoted my life to public service, as vice president of my country, as head of UN organizations, as leader of regional institutions. I believe I can lead this organization through these turbulent times, and to do so around 3 priorities: peace, reform, and future. Excellencies, I chose to step away from my UN position to seek this office, and I used that time to listen. I listened to those of you who want the United Nations back at the table of peace, where agreements are forged through dialogue and diplomacy. Armed conflicts are rising, compounded by new devastating forms of warfare. The frameworks that kept us safe from nuclear arms, from chemical and biological weapons, from the conduct of war itself, are eroding before our eyes. International law and human rights are being violated. Civilians are paying the price for wars they do not wage. Organized crime and terrorism are tearing communities apart. And across every region, I was asked the same question: where is the United Nations? Peacemaking is the purpose of this organization. It will be my first priority. If elected Secretary General, I will be a peacemaker. I will act before conflicts erupt, be the first to pick up the phone. I will travel to where the wars are. I will speak to every party. I will work with the Security Council, with the member states, and will mediate among the mediators. I will propose 10 ideas, even if they fail, and I will accept the cost of rejection and keep trying. Peacemaking takes persistence. I know. In 2022, as part of the Black Sea Initiative, I was at the table when war froze grain exports and food prices surged. I stayed at the table when governments, banks, ships, insurers hesitated. I navigated many no's until I heard a yes. The Istanbul agreements between Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, and the UN reopened the Black Sea. Grain reached people again, and the world avoided a food crisis. That is the Secretary General I intend to be. Excellencies, I also listen to those demanding this organization be more focused, more useful, more responsive, more accountable. To defend the United Nations today is to have the courage to change it. Reform for delivery will be my second priority. If elected Secretary General, I will be a reformer. I know where and when the UN delivers. I've seen the courage of UN peacekeepers, of UN staff in the front lines, where people have no food, children have no schools, women have no safety. Mais je veux aussi nos échecs.
But I also
Construction.
After the earthquake in Haiti, I was wondering whether there was an overlapping there. I wanted them to be complementary, and I can see that we haven't met the needs of the population. We need to have a chance for a build.
At the UN Global Crisis Response Group, I coordinated across agencies to answer the global food, fuel, and financial crisis that shook economies in 2022. At UNCTAD, I rebuilt the trust of a divided board and built the capacity to answer crises as they unfold, when cutting 20% of my post in the middle of the liquidity crisis. Every institution I have led, I have reformed with you, the member states. I will do the same as Secretary General. I know these rooms. I sat here as Vice President of my country. I know the pressures you carry, how much it matters, that every delegation is heard. As steward of your organization, I will be accessible to all member states and work with you in driving delivery. Excellencies, I listen, finally, to those who look at the future and worry about their jobs, about this planet. We are in a world of profound transformation. The return of multipolarity, the arrival of artificial intelligence, the reshaping of trade, the promise of clean technologies. In the middle of so much change, it is natural. People feel uncertain, afraid of being left behind. The problem is when fear becomes its own narrative, distrust the default approach, and fragmentation the result. But the truth, Excellencies, is that we can fragment our actions, but we cannot fragment all of our problems. The ocean that rises on one shore rises on every shore. The algorithm created in one country reshapes lives in every other. The ships, the minerals, the materials that will build this century all depend on supply chains that transcend all regions. None of these can be faced alone. Shaping cooperation for the future is my third priority. If elected Secretary General, I will work to ensure the future has room for all of us, nations large and small. I will stand with countries as they develop at home, lifting people out of poverty. I will work alongside other nations and institutions to lift the structural barriers no country alone can lift. And I will also partner with those at the frontier of change, where new technologies can accelerate development and amplify our delivery. The UN does not have to do everything. The UN remains unique, but unique does not mean alone. Excellencies, this organization was born on the other side of destruction, on the other side of broken trust, on the other side of total war, when all that remained was hope and the courage to build on it. No matter how difficult the circumstances, how adverse the challenge, how fraught the crossroads, there is always a choice. There is always another road. Ladies and gentlemen, I am asking you to choose with me to make peace, to reform for delivery, to cooperate for the future. This is the road I offer, the road I am ready to walk with you. And I thank you.
I thank Ms. Grynspan. We now proceed to the first segment. Delegation wishing to speak in the first segment are invited to press the microphone button now. Members are reminded that they are encouraged to ask short and focused questions. Intervention should be not more than 2 minutes for delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes for delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. Time limits will be strictly enforced by automatic microphone cutoff. A timer will be projected on the screen to assist speakers to observe the time limit. Their microphone will start blinking 30 seconds before time limit elapses. As indicated in my letter, after each intervention, the candidate will be given the floor to respond. The response should not be more than 2 minutes for question from delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes from delegations speaking on behalf of a group of states. I will remind candidates, I will remind you, Ms. Grynspan, of your time limit. Civil society questions will be interspersed with questions from member states. As mentioned before, we will now focus on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. As the first speaker, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, followed by Mali and Andorra.
We'd like to thank Madam Rebeca Grynspan.
Attaches great importance to the selection and appointment of the Secretary General and reaffirms the need to ensure that this process remains open, transparent, and inclusive in accordance with the relevant General Assembly resolutions. First, with reference to the UN80 initiative introduced by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, what is your assessment of the proposal and how do you believe it could advance a United Nations that is more effective, efficient, and delivers greater impact on the ground? How would you ensure that any related reforms fully respect the intergovernmental nature of the United Nations, preserve the balance among its 3 pillars, and do not come at the expense of development mandates or other priorities of developing countries? Second, with the 2030 deadline fast approaching, how would you ensure the full and timely implementation of the Agenda for Sustainable Development, bearing in mind the universality and indivisibility of the goals and targets, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and the commitment to leave no one behind? Specifically, how do you envisage the role of the Secretary General and the UN Secretariat in advancing this objective? Third, if you were appointed as Secretary General, how would you ensure equal and fair distribution based on gender and geographical balance as prescribed by Article 101 of the Charter and the relevant General Assembly resolutions, particularly in terms of the overall increase in the representation of unrepresented and underrepresented countries, especially from developing countries, at the senior level appointments within the UN Secretariat and the broader UN system? Fourth, at a time of shrinking fiscal space, declining ODA, rising debt burdens, and widening development gaps, how would you, as Secretary General, mobilize the United Nations system to defend and advance the development pillar, accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and support financing for development in a manner fully responsive to the priorities of developing countries? Fifth, in light of the organization's persistent liquidity crisis, including warnings of a potential race to bankruptcy, what concrete measures would you, as Secretary General, undertake to promote compliance with Member States' financial obligations, ensuring that assessed contributions are paid in full, on time, and without conditions? Finally, the Group of 77 and China underscores the importance of safeguarding the full independence, impartiality, and institutional integrity of the Secretariat, while ensuring that it provides equitable and effective support to all Member State representations in the discharge of their responsibilities. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Please, Ms. Grynspan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Uruguay on behalf of the G77 and China. With respect to UN80, first of all, I would say we should not waste the hard work done by all the organization and the member states. So we have to build on it, and we have to build on the UN80. But let me be very clear. In the first pillar, cuts are not enough. We know that there are many organizations in the UN that have made the cuts but have not reformed. So that is still to be done. For those organizations not to be weakened, they will have to refocus. They will have to reform. They will have to think in how to be fit for purpose despite what the constraints that have already happened in Pillar 1 of the reform. In Pillar 2, with respect to the mandates, and I take into account the resolution that was passed by the General Assembly, but let's be very clear. There is something to be done by the Secretariat in terms of the interpretation of the mandate for their implementation. And I think that there, the Secretariat has to exert more discipline to avoid duplication and unhealthy competition between the organizations of the UN. If we don't do that, we will be in the same place in some years to come doing the same exercise we are doing today. And with respect to the structural reforms, we will need to take it further. Still, there is a discussion between the membership. We will respect that discussion is for the membership and the member states to take those decisions, but I think that more can be done in the structural pillar. With respect to the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, and what should we do? We are all very cognizant of that we are only 18% on track for the SDGs. And I think that the effort has to be put at the country level. I share the concern of all of you, but I think that we need to go back to the countries, to their priorities with respect to the Agenda 2030. We have to support them to accelerate progress. This is an institution that is too much supply-driven. We have to be much more demand-driven, also supporting the countries for the objective of the 2030 agenda. And with respect to the independence of the Secretary General, let me say that I have always been independent, but I have done that without acrimony. And I think that that's the balance. The balance is how to be independent and maintain the engagement with all the countries of this organization. And I can do that. And lastly, with respect to the fiscal space in the development pillar and the problems and challenges that many of the developing countries are going through, I will have more time to develop these ideas as the questions come in. We have problems with the time limit, but let me say that I understand what is that the developing countries are going through. I know the problems of debt, I know the problems of financing, I know the problems of trade and investment. I will deal with this according to my knowledge and my expertise. Thank you very much.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mali on behalf of the African Group, followed by Andorra and Kyrgyzstan.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the African Group, I would like to thank Ms. Grynspan for her communication, and we do have a few questions for her. Could the speaker point the microphone towards him, please? The absence of Africa amongst permanent members of the Security Council is a historic injustice. This undermines the legitimacy of the main body, and this is a main issue for the continent. What is your position on the reform of Security Council, and how will you use the office of the Secretary General to move intergovernmental negotiations on this issue forward? The Resolution 2792 created a permanent framework for Africa-led peacekeeping operations to be able to benefit from UN budget. But implementing this resolution is at an impasse. What is your approach to the third annual review here, and how are you going to tackle this absence of political will here? On the issue of development, development remains a #1 priority for Africa. what link do you make between Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063 and the Pact for the Future? And what are you going to do to make sure that there's United Nations support to development in Africa? What specifically will you be doing to move the IFI reform forward, including increasing Africa representation within these institutions, including the bias of the rating agencies on Africa? On human rights, how are you going to integrate that in other pillars, security and development, do that without politicizing? Penultimate question now. The African staff within this Secretariat is encountering difficulties, visas, contracts, underrepresentation at level of P5 and higher, and in some cases even discrimination. What measures are you planning so as to tackle these issues? Now, United Office on Africa, the Economic Commission for Africa, the Political Affairs Division need to be strengthened. How are you going to go about that? And a few seconds more now. Which current programs on Africa currently existing are you planning to strengthen and support? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mali on behalf of the African group. Given the time limits also for answer, so maybe if everybody can consider how much time it needs also for answering the question, please, Ms. Grynspan, you have the floor, and we will hear afterwards Andorra and Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Mali on behalf of the African group. With respect to the reform of the Security Council, well, I also come from a region that feels underrepresented, so I understand very well the question. But I know that there are different groups within the member states that have different positions with respect to the reform of the Security Council. And you will have to look for a convergence and what is that you want to take forward. But I have said very clearly that a Security Council that reflects the world of today will carry heavier and better weight. So let me go to the peacekeeping operations in Africa. I'm very aware of the resolution, given the African Union also more deep partnership in the peacekeeping operations. And I know that resolution with respect, especially with respect to the financing, has not been implemented. And I will make, for me, a priority to look at that, because I have said the UN doesn't have the monopoly of peace, and it doesn't have the monopoly of peacekeeping. We have to partner with new actors, with new regional organizations that have the capacities that they didn't have before. The African Union is, in that sense, a very important partner for the UN, and we have to honor that partnership with our commitment. With respect to the development of women, Agenda 2030, the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, the Pact of the Future, all of those are very important mandates that the General Assembly has given the Secretary General and the UN, and we have to comply with the mandates. I was very involved in the Pact of the Future, as all of you now know. And in the Pact of the Future, the international financial system reform was obviously a priority. UNCTAD, as I was Secretary General until very recently, we have launched the debt platform together with the countries. The countries are in the driver's seat. UNCTAD is the Secretariat. I think that is a very important step forward and a milestone that has never happened until today. I will continue to defend and insist on the importance of the financial system for the development of the developing countries.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of La Francophonie ambassadors, followed by Kyrgyzstan and the first civil society organization.
Merci,
Thank you, Madam President. Welcome, Madam Grynspan. The Francophone Group would like to thank you for explaining your strategic vision at a time when the United Nations must respond to systemic crises and a growing fragmentation of the international order. We feel that multilingualism is a strategic lever to strengthen the legitimacy, effectiveness and inclusiveness of the multilateral system. In a context where multilingualism is being relegated to the second league, we'd like to understand your personal view of this and your ability to ensure that this matter remains a high priority. The Francophone Group would like to put to you the following 4 questions. First of all, can you explain your links with French in the UN system and your attachment to multilingualism in your career? And secondly, if you are elected Secretary General, how do you intend to make multilingualism a structural part of your mandate and not just a functional matter? And how would you ensure that the composition of your team would effectively reflect regional, linguistic and cultural diversity of the United Nations? And finally, with regard to your responsibilities in the area of the governance of the Secretariat, how will you develop human resource practices to ensure that linguistic abilities are fully recognized and optimized in the process of recruitment and career progression to ensure that we have linguistic diversity within the Secretariat? The group of French ambassadors, speaking ambassadors, is very much attached to multilingualism based on linguistic and cultural diversity. This is an essential condition for efficiency and effectiveness. We will be looking forward to how you will translate those principles specifically into your work. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of La Francophonie. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to Andorra on behalf of the Francophonie. Let me say that multilingualism, c'est essentiel per las Nations Unies.
It is an essential thing for the United Nations, multilingualism.
A very important step forward on multilingualism because I have been also the head of an organization that was multilingual. And as Secretary General of the Ibero-American Summit, we had wonderful collaboration with the Francophonie, with the Commonwealth, with the CPLP, with the really multilingual and linguistic organizations. And so I will continue with that. Yo impulsé en la UNCTAD.
And in UNCTAD, in addition to the official languages, I promoted us having technical documents in Swahili, Hindi, Urdu, and Portuguese. We didn't have to do that, but we knew that if we did do this, we'd be able to communicate better with very many of the peoples who were reading our documents, but in languages that perhaps they weren't that familiar with. So I will continue to strengthen multilingualism in the United Nations.
With respect to ensuring the composition of my team, let me tell you the following, also related to the question of the G77 in China. The team of the Secretary General has to be plural. It has to bring languages, perspectives, different perspectives, geographical representation, but it has to be at the same time the best team possible. We cannot afford a bad team. We need the best team around the Secretary General. The Secretary General cannot do this alone. It has to have the best team possible. So we have to do both at the same time. We have to have the representation of the languages, of the geography, of the different perspectives, and we have to have the best of the best around the Secretary General.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan on behalf of the landlocked developing countries, followed by the civil society organization, National Alliance of Women's Organizations.
Thank you, Madam President, Ms. Rebeca Grynspan. Dear colleagues, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the group of landlocked developing countries. For 32 countries and over 500 million people, development begins with a structural reality that cannot be changed, its geography. Without direct access to the sea, landlocked developing countries depend on transit through neighboring states. This result is higher trade costs, longer delays, and greater exposure to external shocks. These are not temporary constraints. They are structural conditions that continue to shape our development pathways and limit our full participation in the global economy. At the outset, allow me to thank you, Madam President, for convening this important dialogue at a critical moment for the multilateral system. Ms. Grynspan, for LLDCs, these challenges are not theoretical. They are lived realities. The adoption of the Avaza Program of Action reflects a renewal global commitment in addressing them in a comprehensive and coordinated manner. However, its success will depend not only on ambition alone, but on effective and coherent implementation across the United Nations system. In this regard, we would be interested to hear how you would ensure the full operationalization of the mandates entrusted to the Secretary General under the Program of Action. In particular, how would you mobilize the United Nations system to deliver coordinated implementation and ensure coherence in follow-up monitoring? In conclusion, for the group of landlocked developing countries, the measure of success will not be in adoption of commitments, but in the delivery. We therefore look forward to hearing concrete, actionable proposals that demonstrate how implementation will be ensured in practice, at scale, and with impact to meaningfully advance the development prospects of LLDCs in a sustainable manner. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan on behalf of the landlocked developing countries, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Kyrgyzstan and the group of on behalf of the group of LLDCs. I was in the conference of LLDCs, and we proposed and did a lot of, made a lot of inputs into the program of action. So I'm very familiar with it. And I have to tell you that I have seen really a development on the LDCs that are going from thinking about landlock to land link. They will be very important for trade, and land link will be a centerpiece of that transformation. So we have to help you to overcome what you already said, that is that you have much more costs in trade, and that makes it very expensive to trade and to develop. But now you have a huge opportunity, and we have to help all the LLDCs to really go from the challenge of being landlocked to the opportunity of being land link and really overcome the main element from the geography that you refer to. And the operationalization of the mandates is not a choice for the UN. It's a responsibility, it's a mandate given by the conference. And so we have to make use of the coordination mechanisms that we have created specifically for that. And we have to incorporate those organizations that maybe don't have boots on the ground, but then that can really help with policy advice and with capacity building on the ground so we can really support the priorities of the countries themselves. Thank you.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the civil society organization, National Alliance of Women's Organization, with a pre-recorded video, and I invite the Assembly to view the statement.
My name is Katrina Sutherland from the UK. I am currently one of the co-chairs of the UK Civil Society Women's Alliance, established in 2011 to combat the lack of institutional mechanism in the UK. It currently allows NGOs a space to network and collaborate. We work alongside the UK Government to ensure positive outcomes at the UN CSW process. We are currently following the UN 80 and also this current election for Secretary General, and to that end, thank you for this opportunity to ask a question, which is, given escalating global challenges, how would you use your leadership experience to advance the UN's transformation and revitalise today's multilateral system? And how would you strengthen the UN's productive relationship with civil society to maximise impact? Thank you very much.
I thank the National Alliance of Women's Organization. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of civil society on women's rights. Let me first say a general statement. One of the reasons why the UN has to change is because maybe in 1945, in the UN, we had the concentration of many of the capacities of the world. But that is not anymore the case. Today, countries have much more capacities than they had before. Regional organizations have much more capacities than they had before. The private sector and civil society have more capacities than they had before. We have to change the culture of this organization. We have to learn how to partner, not how to bring everything to the UN, how to partner with others that can bring much more, maybe, capacities on the ground and in many of the issues that we care about. I said, the UN is unique, but it's not alone. We have to partner with civil society, but also with the other actors to be able to comply with a very complex set of challenges that the globe is going through. So I will partner with civil society and with women organizations to maximize the impact. Everywhere I've been, I was able to transform my organization also from this point of view. You know, UNCTAD has, for the first time in its history, parity at the higher level of the management, for the first time. And we did that also understanding the career aspirations of the whole staff. So this is a very important issue. Women are not an afterthought. We are half of the population. We have to be thought not in our vulnerabilities, but in our capacities. We are transformers also of the reality. The UN and civil society will have to partner to make that a reality.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, followed by the European Union and Malawi.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And I would like to thank the candidate, Ms. Rebeca Grynspan, for her presence here today and also for the engagement with the member states. I will ask questions on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, known as ACT, a cross-regional group of 27 small and mid-sized countries committed to transparent and accountable UN and seeking to improve the working methods of the Security Council. First, ACT believes that the Secretary General should be proactive in reaching out to the Security Council when crises are imminent. In your opinion, what are the principles that would guide you to bring matters threatening the maintenance of international peace and security to the attention of the Security Council pursuant to Article 99 of the UN Charter? And what specific steps would you take prior invoking Article 99? And what course of action would you pursue following its invocation if the Council remains deadlocked and the violations continue? And the second, in your vision statement, you commit to crafting a new vision for UN peace operations. What do you consider are the main problems with the current system? And how will the future of peacekeeping look like under your leadership? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia on behalf of the ACT Group, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you to Latvia on behalf of the ACT Group. First of all, let me say that Article 99 is an important tool under the Charter, but it should remain a measure of last resort. And let me say that the reason for that is that the engagement of the Secretary General with the Security Council has not to wait Article 99 invocation. The constant engagement, the strong engagement of the Secretary General with the members of the Security Council, with the large membership of the UN is essential precisely for not invoking Article 99 all the time. And the first thing that I will do, obviously, when I come to office, is to start a permanent and constant engagement with the membership and with the Security Council members. So there is dialogue, even if there is deadlock. It can be deadlock, but it doesn't have to stop the dialogue. The job of the Secretary General is precisely to open spaces in very polarized and divergent interests to look for the convergence, to look for the spaces where we can agree. We don't have to agree on everything, to agree on something that is important for the world and for millions of people. The engagement with the Security Council is essential in the job of the Secretary General, and I even think really that while the standard practice of the SGs is to read statements in the Security Council session, and it's not a standard practice for the SG to attend the informal council consultations. Maybe at the beginning of my tenure, if I am elected Secretary General by you, I would change that and make a greater effort to attend even the Council's informal consultations, to speak more candidly about ongoing situations and threat to international peace and security. So a real priority, but still Article 99 has to be thought very thoroughly when it is used, so not to diminish the importance of the instrument when real emergencies arise.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam President, and a warm welcome to Ms. Grynspan. The European Union and its member states are leading political, financial, and operational supporters of the United Nations and multilateralism, ensuring that the UN can continue to deliver, especially in these critical times. As such, we are deeply invested in the UN Charter, international law, and the UN's success on the ground. We fully expect to be working closely with the Secretary General who shares these values and principles, who can match action with principle, and who has a clear appreciation of the European Union's role in the UN system. At this moment, indeed, the UN needs a Secretary General that is fully prepared to defend and promote with equal vigor all three UN pillars and full respect for the UN Charter and international law. Yesterday, we had a chance to ask candidates about the development pillar and also UN reform. Today, we'll ask about human rights and peace and security. Now, on peace and security, we actively advance, as Europeans, the implementation of key UN mandates through our security and defense missions around the world, whether it's IRINI or ASPIDES, or whether it is in supporting peacekeeping in Somalia or in Lebanon, or through massive humanitarian aid around the world. But nevertheless, the peace and security pillar is being challenged, and the UN's role in it is being challenged. So I'd like to ask on that, Ms. Grynspan, can you mention concretely a major conflict today that you believe you could apply the principles you described, that you could prioritize through mediation steps and other concrete actions to help bring an end to it? On human rights, the European Union remains firmly committed to the universality and indivisibility, while noting with concern that only 1% of the UN system spending is dedicated to human rights mandates at a time human rights are increasingly under attack. Only 1%. So, in that context, may I ask you, from your experience, can you offer a concrete example where the protection of human rights has boosted sustainable development or peace and security, or one where the violation of human rights has regressed sustainable development or peace and security? Can I also ask you, as Secretary General, what will you do to protect the funding of the human rights pillar? Equal cuts to 1% and to 40% clearly result in a catastrophe for the 1%. Is there a plan for you to protect that funding? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much to the Madam President and to the representative of the European Union for a very important question. First of all, the peace and security pillar, and that gives me the possibility to answer a part of the Latvia question that I didn't answer. That is that peace operations has many tools. It's not only peacekeeping, but peacekeeping is a very important part of the peace operation box tool of the UN. And I really believe that in many of the cases, peacekeeping operations have been mandated with a Christmas tree. They have to spread too thin, and then they have to not the resources and not the capacities to do everything at the same time. And we don't hear the field. The field comes and tells us, we can do ABC now, but we cannot do the whole alphabet. And we go and push them to do everything at the same time. So I think that we need clearer mandates for the peacekeeping operations. We need to hear the field, and the headquarters cannot be a wall between the field and the member states. We have to be truthful. We have to give the information that is coming from the field. We have to hear them to really be more effective on the ground and more realistic in what we are asking them to do. And peacekeeping have a mandate to protect human rights and to protect the civilian population. So I believe also, like you, in the universality and indivisibility of the human rights pillar and in the 3 pillars of the UN that are mandated in Article 1 of the Charter. The Charter is not a menu, it's a package. And that means that we have to comply with the principles and the mandates that are coming from the Charter and for all the countries to be able to comply with those principles and mandates. And I do believe that when the human rights starts to be violated, when you follow that, you realize that is many times like the start point of a full conflict development. So early warning with respect to what is happening on human rights could be a very important tool for early warning and early engagement for prevention for a full-scale conflict not to develop. So a very important part of preventive diplomacy indeed.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malawi on behalf of the least developed countries, followed by the Solomon Islands and the next civil society organization.
Thank you, PGA. Ms. Grynspan, Excellencies, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the group of least developed countries. The LDC group expects that the next Secretary General must restore confidence in a charter-driven multilateral system, rescue the SDGs in LDCs, and ensure that no financial or political pressure is allowed to weaken the UN's dedicated support to the most vulnerable countries. Madam Grynspan, the LDC group would like you to share your observations and the following questions, which reflect the core concerns and expectations of the group. Question 1, if elected as Secretary General, what concrete steps would you take to re-establish the United Nations as the central forum for addressing global peace and security, development and financing issues, and how will you ensure that LDCs meaningfully remain at the table to shape these decisions rather than remain on the margins? Question 2, what will be your strategic and innovative approach to mobilize and direct adequate, predictable, and concessional resources to LDCs, including from private investors, and how will you reorient the UN development system so that supporting LDCs to achieve the SDGs becomes a visible system-wide priority at country level? Question 3, in the face of ongoing financial constraints, how will you ensure that resources and dedicated support to LDCs, including to the LDC dedicated UN mechanisms, are protected and strengthened rather than reduced? And what specific measures will you put in place to ring-fence this support from across the board cuts? Question 4, as the UN faces unprecedented challenges from within and outside, what strategic approach will you undertake to reinvigorate the UN development pillar to deliver transformative system-wide support for LDCs, ensuring that the promise of the UN Charter translates into tangible, lasting progress for those furthest behind? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malawi on behalf of the least developed countries, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you to the representative of Malawi on behalf of the LDCs. Let me first say that I believe that the UN80 or any reform in the future of the UN system should not weaken the support and the presence of the UN in the most vulnerable countries. And that is a principle that all of us will have to protect. With respect to the LDCs, let me just share with you, the representative of Malawi, the same concerns. You know, the LDCs are spending today around 22% of their revenues in servicing the debt. So we have a problem and a crisis of development because there is no fiscal space in the LDCs to really assign the resources to the basic needs of their population. 22% of the revenues of the LDCs. And they are receiving from foreign direct investment, you guess, only 2% of the total foreign direct investment of the world. So there is a problem. We have said that today 3.4 billion people live in countries that spend more in servicing the debt than on education or health. If that is not a crisis of debt, at least you have to agree with me that it's a crisis of development. Nobody wants to call it a crisis because the markets are not in crisis. but people are. And the LDCs are the ones that are devoting the most of the servicing of the debt, of their revenue to the debt. So we need the international system to support the LDCs. We need the multilateral development banks crowding in private investment to reduce the risk. Africa talked before also about the credit rating agencies. Yes, we have a problem because Africa is paying between 4 and 8 times more in interest rates than the rest of the globe, than the rest of the developed, even the developed countries. So we need the international system. We need the multilateral development banks to be capitalized. We need that they will go at scale. We need them to lower the risk and crowd in private investment so the countries, the LDCs, the LLDCs can really do development for the future. So I will be a partner of yours in doing that, and my voice will be strong in advocating for the systemic obstacles that the countries face to be dealt with. So development, SDGs, and the Agenda 2030 can really benefit all.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Solomon Islands on behalf of the Pacific Island Forum, followed by Action by Churches Together Alliance.
Thank you, Madam Grynspan, for sharing your strategic vision and engagement this morning. I have the honor to address you today on behalf of the members of the Pacific Forum represented with a presence in New York. We thank the President of the General Assembly for this valuable opportunity to engage directly with the candidates for the Secretary General. The Pacific region faces many challenges, some shared by members across this Assembly, others unique to our region. But no challenge is more pressing than climate change, which will disproportionately imperil lives, livelihoods, security, and the well-being of Pacific people. Secretary General Guterres' visit to our region helped him to appreciate the gravity of this threat and to mobilize international attention. It also allowed him to appreciate the region's leadership and to hear firsthand from our communities on the work they are doing to bolster resilience. During his visit to Tonga for the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Summit in 2024, the Secretary General described the Pacific region as, and I quote, a beacon of solidarity and strength, environmental stewardship and peace, end of quote. The Pacific and the UN have a long history of collaboration, and we want to ensure that this partnership continues and is prioritized under UN's new leadership. We have 2 questions for all candidates. First, how would you use the Office of the Secretary General to draw attention and to mobilize action to address the unique vulnerabilities of all small island developing states, including Pacific Seeds, in particular, the impacts of climate change? Second, the UN is often pulled towards crisis that dominates headlines, as realities unfold more slowly with irreversible consequences. How will you balance urgent conflicts with existential threats such as impacts of climate change? What criteria will guide your decision where attention and political capital will be directed to? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Solomon Islands on behalf of the Pacific Island Forum. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much for the Solomon Islands. On behalf of the seats, thank you, Madam President. I am very aware of the threats that climate change pose on the small island development states. And I see as very worrying the new indicators that we have with respect to how disasters have hit the seeds in a double rate in the last 2 decades than before. So the seeds are experiencing an extreme weather impact on their economies, on their people, and on their possibilities of resilience and sustainability. So we have said also that the financing of climate change cannot go only to mitigation, but it has to go to adaptation. We need to support the countries to adapt to the already impacts that we are seeing because of climate change. But also, there are other things that are really impacting the small island developing states. You know that when costs of trade transactions, of freight, go up, the small island developing states see that impact 4 times more than the rest of the world. What is happening today in the choke points of maritime trade is affecting already the small island developing states for something that they have nothing to do with. So we need to invest much more in a better connectivity and better support for adaptation and resilience in the seas, and be aware of the incredible challenges that they face because of climate change and poor financing and high cost in the global economy. At the same time, you ask me is what the Office of the Secretary General can do and what will be my stand on that. Let me just say that there is advances on the vulnerability indicator that the seats have asked this membership to consider. I think that that is work in progress, that we have to continue to try to measure differently the challenges that the seats are facing that are not related to the GDP per capita, but are related with very specific vulnerabilities. That will go a long way in considering in the development pillar the specificity of the small island development states. And I intend to push in that direction if I am elected Secretary General.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, Action by Churches Together Alliance. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I speak on behalf of ACT Alliance, a faith and rights-based coalition working around the world on humanitarian action, sustainable development, and advocacy. Our question is the following. In a time in which credibility, independence, and effectiveness of the United Nations are called into question, what actions should the Secretary General take to promote the organization's ability to ensure member states' accountability, prevent and mediate international disputes, ensure the universal application of human rights, and fight back against the politicization of humanitarian aid? In other words, what concrete steps can the Secretary General take to restore the organization's relevance as the global actor mandated to save humankind from the scourge of war, secure equal rights of all peoples and nations, and promote social progress?
I thank the distinguished representative of the civil society. Please, Ms. Grynspan, you have the floor. Afterwards, Singapore and Egypt.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of civil society. Let me first take the floor with respect to the politicization of humanitarian aid. I think that you are absolutely right. We fought for so long for the humanitarian space to be free of politics, because all people of the world has to be protected in their human rights and in their basic needs. And that's really the basis of humanitarian action. And we have seen, I have to admit, we have seen the politicization of the humanitarian space. So I count on the membership of the General Assembly, I count on civil society to push back on this trend. We need to push back on the politicization of humanitarian aid. Everybody that is in peril and that needs food and shelter, we should not discriminate with respect to the basic needs of people. So let's do this together. Let's push hard again on a basic principle of humanitarian action, that is to not allow for the politicization of the humanitarian space. What actions should be taken by the Secretary General? Obviously, to strengthen the humanitarian actions on the field and to make sure that there is no bias, no discrimination, no politicization, and total independence of the actions of the humanitarian organizations in the UN. And I
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group, followed by Egypt and Palau.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and a very warm welcome to Ms. Grynspan. I have the honor indeed to deliver this statement on behalf of the Small States Group, which is a cross-regional grouping of small states comprising both developed and developing countries. More than 50 small states have aligned with this statement, and the full list of countries will be made available after this meeting. Ms. Grynspan, as someone who comes from a small state yourself, I know very well, and you know very well, that we are all living in a volatile and dangerous period in international relations, characterized by geopolitical tension and conflict. And for small states who constitute the vast majority of the UN's membership, an effective multilateral system founded on the principles of the UN Charter and international law is not an option, but an existential necessity. The next Secretary General will play a critical role, not only in defending the UN Charter, but also in reinvigorating and reshaping the role and relevance of the United Nations. We look to the Secretary General to safeguard the interests of all member states, especially the interests of the smallest, weakest, and most vulnerable members of the UN. We do not want a world of might is right, where international law and the sovereign and territorial integrity of small states are violated with impunity. The members of the Small States Group stand ready to work with the next Secretary General and all member states to strengthen the role of the UN and to defend international law and multilateralism. In the interest of brevity, I'll go directly to the questions now. Ms. Grynspan, firstly, what steps will you take to strengthen the role of the General Assembly, especially at a time when the Security Council has been unable to take decisive action? And a related question, how will you support and strengthen the office of the President of the General Assembly? Secondly, the SDGs and the Pact for the Future are landmark outcome documents. They provide a roadmap for global action and partnership, and you did refer to them in your opening remarks. But we'd like to know how you intend to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs and the Pact for the Future. Thirdly, we all know that we are at a critical moment when public perception of the UN seems to have become critical and even cynical in many countries around the world. How do you plan to galvanize support for the work of the UN, especially among younger people who represent the future in all our societies? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group. Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to Singapore for the questions. And as you said and started by saying, I come from a small country. I know exactly what we are talking about, what are the challenges, and what is the importance of hearing the big and the small in the concert of the UN. And it's very important to consider, obviously, the voice of the small countries in the present especially in the present circumstances, because our resilience comes from our interdependence. we cannot be successful, or we cannot succeed by our own. We have to be in the network. We need the international community. We need the international law. We need the rules to be able to thrive. And so the small countries, and the FOS in this case, are a very important component of the coalition for multilateralism, because that's our only possibility to really thrive in this a very difficult world. So thank you very much for what the group does. And I think that the group has to exist also to advise the Secretary General in the things to be done. So let me go to the questions very rapidly. How to accelerate the implementation of the Pact of the Future and the SDGs? And I said before, we have to be fit for purpose to implement the SDGs at the country level. We have to be much better as a system to be able to coordinate our efforts for what are the priorities that the countries have established by themselves. And we have to hear the priorities and support them. I said also that we are too much, many times, supply-driven instead of demand-driven by the needs of the countries of our support. When I was vice president, I was in charge of the cooperation, international cooperation, and many times I felt that what I needed was not offered, what was offered, I didn't need. And so let's try to close that gap. The Secretary General can be a very important voice for the development system to really try to help the countries on the field and put their act together to do that in a coordinated manner. Thank you.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt on behalf of the Arab group, followed by Palau and Trinidad and Tobago.
Madam President, it is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab group. The group welcomes the participation of Mrs. Rebeca Grynspan in this interactive dialogue. The Arab group stresses its willingness to constructively cooperate with the next Secretary General to support the role of the UN and promote its ability to counter current international challenges and promote the principles of the UN Charter, ensuring international peace and security and sustainable development. The group would like to ask the following questions to Mrs. Grynspan. First, how do you perceive the role of the Secretary General in promoting the role of the UN and its the complementary of its effort towards the Palestinian question, so that we ensure the implementation of all resolutions and decisions and ensure a just and sustainable peace in the region? Second, and linked to the supporting humanitarian action and the role of the UN, how do you see the promotion of the implementation of international law and its provisions, especially in the area of humanitarian action, supporting different UN agencies, especially UNRWA, so that it can undertake its mandate at times that are not very welcoming in the occupied Palestinian territory? In my national capacity.
What specific reforms would you implement to address the chronic liquidity crisis and mounting arrears the UN suffers from, and to ensure financial sustainability and accountability without undermining core mandates? And thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt on behalf of the Arab group.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Egypt on behalf of the Arab group. Thank you, Madam President. And let me also highlight the role that Egypt has played with respect to the debtors platform that was launched in Washington. Thank you so much for the support. And let me start by saying that we have to support the full implementation of Resolution 2803 of the Security Council, and really do whatever is in our hand to support the ceasefire to hold and the UN humanitarian agencies to have unrestricted access to Gaza. And let's hope that we can pave the path for a permanent solution according to the GA and Security Council resolutions for Israel and Palestine to live in peace and security. We need to support this path for the future. All members of the UN have to comply with international law that give clear responsibilities to member states. I said we need to push back on any politicization of humanitarian aid. It cannot be used as a weapon. So let me go to the second question, to your third question with respect to the reform for the liquidity crisis to ensure financial accountability and not hurt the mandates that are coming from member states. Let me first say, because I haven't before, that my political career started in the Ministry of Finance. So I have dealt with complex budgets in my life and with difficult decisions. When I came to the Ministry of Finance, we were in the debt crisis of my country. We were in what was later called the lost decade of Latin America. So I have dealt with financial issues all my life. I've been in my country dealing with financial issues. When I was the associate administrator of UNDP, I was in charge of the operational group. It was an organization of $4 billion at that time, not fully funded also. So I know the complexities of the budget. I understand the numbers. Believe me, the first thing I will do if I am elected Secretary General is to ask for the numbers they want, to be able to drive the organization based on reality. I am not a voluntarist. I am a strategist. And so this is about strategy. It's not about will. We all want to solve this problem by decree. We cannot. We have to engage, we have to convince, we have to deliver, and for that, we need to reverse the trend in which we are, but we cannot do that without the help of member states, because also there has to be a space for action of the Secretary General with respect to the financial rules of the organization. It's in your hands, you will have to take that decision, but it will be very helpful to support a transition period to a more prosperous UN, also from the resource point of view. Thank you.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, followed by Trinidad and Tobago and Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this important dialogue. And I also wish to thank Ms. Grynspan for your interaction with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 39 members of the Alliance of Small Island States. As a group of countries in special situations, the credibility of the United Nations lies in its ability to respond to the unique circumstances of SIDS, correct longstanding inequities, and deliver results for the most vulnerable. In this regard, allow me to pose the following questions. Number one, how will you, as Secretary General, ensure that the UN system is more accessible, better coordinated, and tailored to the unique vulnerabilities of SIDS to better and more meaningfully support the full implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS? And number two, what specific measures will you take to improve on the underrepresentation of SIDS within the UN Secretariat, especially at senior leadership levels? And how will you strengthen pathways for SIDS nationals to shape decision-making across the UN? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of SIDS, please.
Yeah, thank you very much to Palau and to the representative of Palau on behalf of the seat. Thank you very much, Madam President. As I said, I understand very well the unique circumstances of the seats. Coming from a small country, I also have a lot of empathy for the things that you are going through. I know that some seats have lost territory because of climate change in the last year. As I said, you are now doubly impacted by the phenomena of natural disasters, and we need to operationalize the index for vulnerability and try to see how we can use it much better for the needs of the seats. It's not only an indicator for an intellectual exercise. What we want is that to impact and to shape decision-making within the organizations. And let me say that I have also the experience from UNCTAD. We developed the first strategy for seats that UNCTAD has ever had. And we did it in full consultation with you and full alignment with the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for Action. So you have a partner and you have a supporter of the agenda of the seats if I am elected Secretary General.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago on behalf of the Caribbean community.
Thank you, Madam President. I speak on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean community. And let me say thank you very much to Ms. Grynspan for offering herself to the international community and for her service thus far. In sticking with the thematic segment of leadership experience and skills, I wish to ask a question similar to what was asked by the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of his group, but more specifically in one area. In an era marked by growing polarization, unilateralism, and skepticism toward international institutions, what role do you see, Ms. Grynspan, for the Secretary General in rebuilding trust in multilateralism, particularly among younger generations and communities who feel marginalized or left behind by global processes? And my second question, the President of the General Assembly prefaced her introductory remarks, and I'm paraphrasing her here, that the world is at a critical juncture, potentially in uncharted waters, requiring a particular type of leadership. Having said that, reflecting on the current Secretary General's tenure, are there aspects of his approach that you would handle differently? And how would you hope your own tenure to be defined or remembered? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago on behalf of CARICOM. Please.
Thank you very much to the representative of Trinidad and Tobago and on behalf of the CARICOM. You know, trust is so difficult to build and is so easy to destroy. And it doesn't, you don't rebuild trust in one day. But you can only rebuild trust with a double-fold strategy. The first is to engage, is to talk, is to dialogue, is to be there. And that is the main job of the Secretary General, to rebuild trust in this organization from the membership. But also, we need to rebuild trust in the populations, on the global citizenship with the rest of the world. And for that, I think that we have to change our communications. Communications has to be seen not as a marketing exercise, but part of our delivery action. To deliver better, we have to communicate better. And that will be really a priority for me going forward. But trust, and you said that, is also about the kind of leadership that you will exert. Your integrity, your impartiality will be essential to be able to rebuild trust. You cannot rebuild trust in an organization if the head of the organization is not trusted. I have been a leader of many organizations. I have been a leader in my country. I know what it takes. As I said, I can be independent without being or building acrimonious relationships. We have to be engaged with everybody, but we have to maintain the principles and the moral voice of the organization. And you cannot build trust if you don't have that. So let's do this together. It's not only for the Secretary General to do it, but I can assure you that my type of leadership is being tough, being clear of what has to be done, but also to listen and to engage with the membership, to do a collective action to rebuild trust in the multilateral system, that it will be essential for also solving the other problems of the international system, that is the financial crisis, the political crisis, and the operational crisis that we are going through.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished speaker of Indonesia on behalf of the UN 80 Global Group, followed by Uganda and Timor-Leste.
Thank you, Madam President, and also thank you, Ms. Grynspan, for sharing your vision for the future of the United Nations. I will ask the following question on behalf of the UN 80 Global Group, a cross-regional group comprising of Barbados, Jordan, Kenya, Mexico, New Zealand, Norway, Senegal, Singapore, and my own country, Indonesia. Excellency, if elected as the next Secretary General, what will you do to meaningfully restore trust between the Secretariat and Member States, the Executive Office of Secretary General, and the rest of the system, and global confidence in the UN? And now allow me to add question in our national capacity. We take note of your emphasis on restoring confidence in the UN, peacemaking, advancing UN reform, as well as strengthening cooperation for the future. At a time when multilateralism is facing increasing fragmentation, the role of Secretary General is more critical than ever. The Secretary General must serve as a moral leader and bridge builder. In this regard, Indonesia would like to pose the following questions. If you are elected as the UN Secretary General, what are your quick wins or concrete plans for the first 100 days? And lastly, what is your vision for the role of the youth? How do you envision strengthening meaningful youth participation in shaping global norms and contributing to forward-looking and future-ready multilateral solutions? We look forward to your insights. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia on behalf of UN80 Global Group. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to Indonesia on behalf of the group. What are my concrete plans to rebuild trust? I have answered that question before. I will agree with you that we need to restore trust. I don't know if it's trust only between the Secretariat and the membership. I think that is also trust within the membership of the UN that has to be restored. And the Secretary General has to engage, has to dialogue, has to be there, has to be present, has to talk, and has to bridge. We understand that we are in an organization where there are very many conflicting interests. The Secretary General has to create the space for a convergence of those interests in things that can be very important for the rest of the world. And that is the main job of the Secretary General, no doubt. Now, what I will do from the beginning to refocus on the good offices of the Secretary General. And so let me say that, as I did in my opening speech, that we need to go back at the table where the crises are, where the discussions are being held, where peace is being forged. We have to be there not only for presence, but to forge agreements. And I think that the office of the Secretary General should be restructured for that purpose. Today, we don't have an office of the Secretary General that really have the capacities to do mediation as we want that to happen. There is no way that we can do mediation in a bureaucratic pyramidal structure. Bureaucratic structures can do very good things, but they cannot do this. We need flexible teams that have the capacity, that have the objective clear, that are at the highest level in the agenda of the Secretary General, and the Secretary General itself have to engage. The first thing I will do is to restructure the office of the Secretary General to be fit for purpose for the priorities that we have set and that I have set in my vision statement in, obviously, a contact and dialogue with the membership.
I thank you. As 1.5 hours have already passed again, while there's still interest to speak on the first segment, I would like to invite member states and groups to focus on the second segment as well, if not done so yet, on the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights. Next speaker on the list is the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement, followed by Timor-Leste and Austria.
Madam President, I speak on behalf of the 121 member states of the non-aligned movement. We welcome the holding of this informal dialogue to exchange views with the candidates of the Secretary General. I have a few questions from the non-aligned movement. Number one, the Declaration on the Right to Development was adopted in 1986 by the UN. What is your position on the right to development, and how would you advance its implementation within the United Nations system? Number two, how do you assess the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the ability of affected developing countries to achieve sustainable development goals and fully implement the 2030 agenda? What concrete actions would you promote in your capacity as Secretary General to strengthen the role of the United Nations in opposing such illegal measures that violate the UN Charter, particularly urging their elimination and promoting mechanisms that prevent their application? Number three, the non-aligned movement reaffirms it is the leading role of the United Nations in promoting multilateralism and international cooperation, which are essential for addressing global challenges that impact the member states of the movement. In this context, what concrete measures would you propose to further strengthen multilateralism and international cooperation in light of their current erosion, resulting inter alia from non-compliance with the international obligations? Related to that, how would you promote a more inclusive global governance and ensure the effective consideration of the needs and priorities of developing countries, particularly the Global South? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Please.
Yeah, in the first place, well, thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Uganda, representing the non-aligned movement. And I understand that the 1986 resolution given development pillar a central role in the organization of the UN, And obviously, coming from the development pillar myself, I am very aware of it, and I will take all the measures to comply with the resolution and the mandate of the General Assembly. With respect to the sanctions regime, I really think that all sanctions regime has to consider the impact on the population, and especially the humanitarian impact on the population. Even in the sanctions that are imposed by the Security Council, that are legal sanctions, there is a resolution precisely giving OCHA the role to report on non-desired impacts on the population on humanitarian issues. So on that, the position has to be very clear. We should not pursue or allow for an impact on the civil population of the countries with the sanctions regime in the framework of humanitarian law. And with respect to the non-compliance with obligations, I have said there is not a law for some and not a law for others. The law has to be applied for everybody. And the responsibility of the memberships and of the countries is to comply with international law. And there is no double standards here. And we should not have any double standards in the UN and in the behavior of the Secretary General. And with respect to more inclusive a more inclusive UN, it gives me the opportunity to say also to others that I didn't have the time to answer, that the underrepresentation and non-representation of so many countries in the staff composition of the UN is of concern. We have like 30 countries that don't have representation, that are underrepresented, and around 20 that are not represented at all. So that has to be of concern for the next Secretary General, and we need to do much more in our talent management to really face that problem.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste on behalf of the Committee of the Portuguese-speaking countries, followed by Austria and South Africa.
Excellency, Madam President, Excellency, Madam Grynspan, thank you for your briefing. I have the honor of speaking on behalf of the community of Portuguese-speaking countries and also on my national capacity. The CPLP, Madam, spans 4 continents and is home to over 280 million people, united by a common language, shared heritage, and strong cultural ties. We are also connected by the ocean, which is central to our economies, our cultures, and our future. In this context, we would welcome your views on the following. How would you position the ocean within the United Nations agenda and advance concrete action in areas such as the implementation of BBNG agreement, combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and mobilizing financing for a sustainable blue economy? Now I'll speak on my national capacity. Amid the continued decline in official development assistance, small and vulnerable economies are being asked to take on ever-growing responsibilities with far fewer resources. At the same time, we live in a global system where economic dependency is reproduced and where structural gaps, especially in market access, continues to determine development outcomes. Madam, what concrete measures will you take to ensure that small economies like Timor-Leste, with limited access to markets and constrained productive capacity, are not left behind? Specifically, how will you strengthen global solidarity, expand equitable financing, and support domestic resource mobilization so that these countries can participate meaningfully in the global economy rather than remain dependent on external shocks and unequal structures? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste on behalf of the Committee of the Portuguese-speaking countries. Please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to Timor-Leste in representation of the CPLP. Let me first say that the blue economy is so important for so many countries. We have many countries that are bigger with respect to the ocean than to the land. My country, for example, is an example of that. And we need to guarantee that there is sustainable use of the ocean and that we protect also the health of the oceans in which that we depend on. So BBNJ is a great thing forward. We have not only the resolutions in the UN, we also have the concrete example of the decision and consensus reached in WTO precisely to try to curb overfishing and to establish certain practices in trade that will protect the ocean and give more stability to the small countries and the small fisheries that suffer so much from not only climate change in the ocean, but also pollution. We have talked about plastic pollution in the ocean and how important it is to get an agreement so you can curb that problem that is really affecting negatively the health of oceans. And the health of oceans are essential for the sustainability of humanity. So work with coastal communities and help for the resilience and the practice for the common objective of maintaining a health economy, a health ocean, and protect the blue economy. With respect to the concrete measures that constrain productive capacity and market access in these small countries, well, I come from the Organization of the UN on Trade and Development. That's what we do. Let me say that there is a link between trade and the mobilization of national resources. When we digitalize customs, we digitalize customs in more than 100 countries. When we do that, then revenues go up. In some countries, 70% up. There is no tax reform that will give you that type of revenue. So let's continue supporting trade facilitation in the countries. Trade is essential, and I referred already to the financial part of it, but trade continues to be essential for the small countries for their development and for their possibilities of growth. Let's make that happen with our support.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the group of friends on the rule of law, followed by South Africa and the next civil society organization.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Madam Rebeca Grynspan, and thank you for going strong after almost 2 hours, bearing with us. I have the honor to speak on behalf of over 50 cross-regional members of the group of Friends of the Rule of Law. In recent years, we have witnessed breaches of even the most fundamental provisions of the UN Charter, including the obligation of all member states to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force, as well as mass atrocities committed at large scale in grave breach of international law. All this paired with the failure of the Security Council to take adequate action in response. So now my 2 questions on behalf of the group of friends. What concrete, proactive and preventive measures would you personally pursue if elected Secretary General to strengthen the rule of law and prevent breaches by member states of the Charter's principles and of international law? And second question, what specific preventive diplomacy initiatives would you launch or strengthen? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the group of friends on the rule of law, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to Austria on behalf of the group of friends of the rule of law. Let me tell you that I have 2 sisters. I never get tired of discussing. So thank you very much for your question. And I think that in your question is also the answer. Yes? Preventive diplomacy is part, or an essential part, to prevent the violation of international law and the principles of the Charter. So every time, preventive diplomacy is the most cost-effective measure. And it's interesting that when you read the Charter, in Article 1, precisely preventive diplomacy is the first thing to be said. It says that take collective actions precisely to prevent war, to prevent conflict, to prevent mass atrocities. And preventive diplomacy then is a common responsibility. It's a responsibility of all of us. But obviously, as I said before, I think that the political unit in the executive office of the Secretary General has to be transformed in an office that will refocus the act of the Secretary General on the good offices part of the Secretary General. And we need to build there the capacities to be able to do that. And also the prevention and mediation parts of the UN maybe have to come more together, more coordinated for us to do that more effectively. But I believe in small teams that can do the job with flexibility, with agility, when things merit that. And obviously, the moral voice of the Secretary General will be essential.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa on behalf of the Southern African Development Community, followed by the next civil society organization, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons.
Thank you, Madam President, and also thank you from our side to Ms. Grynspan for taking the time and for having this interactive dialogue. We really appreciate it, and it's very helpful to hear from her. I'll jump right into it, Madam President, as you requested, so we'll be very specific with our questions. Just 3 questions from the Southern African Development Community. You've spoken to this already, Ms. Grynspan, but I think it's good to elaborate further on it because our chair of the month, the PR of Mali, asked us, but which Africa-related commitments from the current Secretary General's tenure would you retain and build on? And linked to this is, in light of the organization's liquidity constraints, how would you safeguard development mandates and ensure sufficient funding for Africa-focused programs? Then you've already spoken to the question about independence and the pressures that the Office of the Secretary General obviously encounters. But we'd like to explore that a little bit further to ask what would you do to safeguard the independence of the Office of the Secretary General, especially in terms of major contributors that place conditions, make demands under threat of withholding assessed contributions or delaying contributions. And it should be noted that some of these contributors, their nationals occupy positions, the most senior positions in the organization. So just to get a sense from you, what would you do as a Secretary General if you are elected? And then lastly, on another subject, the world is facing a major environmental crisis that requires urgent action. How would you seek, as Secretary General, to defend environmental rights and implement climate justice? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa on behalf of the Southern African Development Community. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much to South Africa on behalf of the South African Development Community. And let me first say something about Africa, yes? Every time I go to Africa, I feel hope. It's a continent that has a vision. It's a continent with so many young people that are so creative and that are really taking the continent to a different level. And I sometimes feel a bit envy, good envy, because I see that there is this energy in Africa. The African free trade area, for example, will bring so much opportunities to the African continent. And I say this because we tend to see Africa only in its vulnerabilities, but Africa has so much potential, and that potential is being seen already. It's not something that we have to wait for the future. So we need to help Africa to make those promises real. With the new wealth in natural resources and the need for your natural resources, for the future of the world, for the new technologies and the frontier technologies, you can really make this happen for in the international value chains, adding value to your production, giving good jobs for the people, fighting poverty and insecurity. And it's so important to think about Africa as a continent that will really make a lot to talk about while this is happening. So let me first say that, because the protection of the mandates that we have to make is, now that aid is going down, is for opportunities to go up, is to take the structural obstacles that the continent is facing precisely to make these opportunities real for the people. And I said before, for example, the heavy burden that you have to pay on debt for, even after the COVID crisis. We forgot about COVID, but the impact of COVID is still in many of the countries, and especially in the financial part, where after COVID, the investment in Africa and in the African continents, the foreign direct investment is going down. So let's make that real. I believe in the organizations that have to coordinate within the UN to make that happen. My organization was one of them, and I think that we are in a much better position today to not only safeguard the organizations, but make them much more effective for the development of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Please, you have the floor, followed by Japan and Belgium.
Thank you, Madam President. Nuclear disarmament has been a fundamental objective of the UN since this institution's inception, explicit even in the GA's first ever resolution. Yet today, risks from nuclear weapons are at an all-time high, and nuclear armed states are expanding arsenals and, with their allies, increasing the role of so-called nuclear deterrence in security doctrines. Their actions raise the likelihood of nuclear proliferation, testing, and use, and undermine nuclear disarmament. By contrast, the vast majority of UN member states have rejected nuclear weapons unequivocally through support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which to date counts most of the world's countries as states parties or signatories. Ms. Grynspan, as candidate for Secretary General, what do you see as the most promising pathway toward a world free of nuclear weapons? And how would you advance this increasingly urgent goal?
I thank the distinguished representative of the civil society, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much to the representative of civil society. Well, the NPT conference will happen very soon. So you have an opportunity there to really make the call that the civil society is making. That is a very reasonable call, yes? I come from a region that have the Tlatelolco Accord, and in that sense, we are free, as a free zone of nuclear weapons. And you have the opportunity in the next discussions for the membership to make a difference, to preclude nuclear proliferation and higher risk for the world coming from it. So I hope that the responsibility of all of you in making the world safer will be taken seriously. And obviously the voice of the Secretary General is important. But we know very well that exactly on the issues of disarmament, the driving seat is and lies with the membership. So voice is important, but your actions will be more important to try to comply with the objective that was set up by the representative of civil society.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan on behalf of the group of 4.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to ask the following question on behalf of the Group of Four, consisting of Brazil, India, Germany, and my own country, Japan. The G4 plays a pivotal role in advancing the reform of the Security Council. The Security Council bears primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. However, the relevance of the Council has been questioned as its composition is a mere snapshot of the international environment from 80 years ago. As the next Secretary General, what specific initiatives do you intend to take to reform the Security Council? Since I have the floor, I would like to ask two questions in my national capacity. First, Japan strongly believes in standing by the principles of the UN Charter and defending the international order based on the rule of law. I would therefore like to ask about your strategy for the UN to promote the observance of and development of international law, including through strengthening support to legal institutions such as ICJ and ILC. Second question is, amid growing uncertainty in the international community with a number of conflicts, Japan believes the perspective of human security, which links development and peace seamlessly, is indispensable for addressing existential challenges. In this connection, as the Chief Executive Officer of the UN, how do you mobilize multilateral system centering the UN agencies, which are often criticized for silos and duplication of functions? Behind this issue, we observe lots of vested interests by organizations themselves as well as member states. And in order to achieve results, how do you lead the UN system? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan on behalf of the Group of Four. Please.
As I have said before, thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to Japan on behalf of the Group of G4. As I have said before, I myself come from a region that is underrepresented in the Security Council. But I am also very aware that there are very different positions and different groupings within the UN. And so it's for the membership to try to come for a convergence and a consensus in terms of the reform. It's not only the composition of the Security Council. There are groups also questioning or trying to change the methods of work of the Security Council, to give just an example. So you are in the driving seat of the reform of the Security Council, and but I have said also that the Security Council will carry more weight if it will represent more the world of today than the world of 1945. So my position is clear. And with respect to the legal institutions, like the ICJ, they are in the Charter. It's very important to support them and to obey by their resolutions. With respect, let me say something about the job of the Secretary General as CAO. First of all, let me say that I really believe that as leaders of our organizations, we cannot outsource administration. We cannot outsource management. Many times we want only the glorious job of representing the organization and be in the very high level political discussions, and we don't want to do the management. We have to do the management. And let me tell you that it's very important that management don't lead you, but you lead management. And we all know that if you don't get involved and you don't have the knowledge to really lead the organization towards the reform, towards the changes that it has to go through, then the administration will lead you to maintain the status quo. And so I think that all the organizations I have been in, I have led the reform. I knew how the management and the rules and the platforms of management much better than all the rest, because it's the only way in which you can really lead the organization toward management change and different results.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium on behalf of the Benelux countries, followed by Ireland and New Zealand.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Benelux, a long-standing regional partnership comprising Luxembourg, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and my own country, Belgium. I align with the statement delivered by the European Union. A very warm welcome to you, Madam Grynspan. I thank you for your comprehensive and forward-looking vision. We appreciate your emphasis on the need for courage to change the UN in order to defend it, and on the need to rebuild trust and deliver results. We consider that the UN needs, above all, a Secretary General with proven leadership and reform credentials, capable of guiding a complex organization in a time of geopolitical tension and financial pressure. We attach particular importance to a Secretary General who can strengthen trust in multilateralism and the international legal order, act as a strong convening power across all three pillars, and who can proactively contribute to prevention, peace-building, and mediation. At the same time, we see a need to strengthen the UN's financial sustainability, accountability, and system-wide coherence. We place high value on leadership that can connect the UN's development work with broader efforts on peace, security, and human rights, particularly in times of systemic stress. I have two questions. First, given your strong background in development and international economic governance, how would you ensure that the UN plays a more proactive and coherent role in preventing conflict and sustaining peace, and takes active part in mediation efforts? Second, could you share your early thinking on the composition of your senior leadership team, including the Deputy Secretary General? How would you approach considerations such as regional balance, gender, and the specific qualities needed to support your priorities? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belgium on behalf of the Benelux countries, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to the representative of Belgium on behalf of Benelux for the two questions, very important ones. Well, I have said to ensure more proactive role in the prevention and mediation agenda and peace and security, the SG has to be proactive. It has to be there. It has to take more risk. We have become a risk conservative organization. And the only one that can take risks and not pay the price in a general election is the Secretary General and is this organization. A government cannot do that. If a government will fail 10 times in trying to solve a problem, it will fail. Yes? If the UN only fails when we don't try. We have to try once and again. And I said, I am ready to bear the cost of not succeeding. I am ready to do that and try again. And I think that the only way to be in prevention and mediation is with active diplomacy, is being there, is talking. But it's not only for the dialogue itself that is very important, but it's also to forge agreement. And I have done that in my life, in all my political career. I have breached positions that were irreconcilable. I have been able to bring together collective action. I have been able to convince when at the beginning there was not any probability of convincing. I have done that. I have had a long career. I am not naive. I have been in politics. I have been in leadership positions in many organizations. As I said, I am not a voluntarist. I am a strategist, and I will put my best judgment and efforts in doing that. But I cannot do that alone, and that is the second question. My team has to be plural, has to represent geographies, has to represent languages, has to represent different perspectives, but it has to be the best team possible so we can do this job. With respect to the DSG, let me tell you, the only thing that I can assure you is that it won't be from my region.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Ireland, also on behalf of Iceland. Please, the distinguished representative of Ireland has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Madam Grynspan. And I have the honour to speak on behalf of Ireland and my own Iceland and my own country, Ireland. And we fully back your call for an active, indeed a proactive diplomacy, and for the UN to be in the room when decisions are being made. Just two quick questions. Firstly, in relation to the UN 80 initiative, and one of the strands that is being looked at is the review of the network of some 30 special envoys of the Secretary General. Do you believe, as of now, that this network serves its purpose, that it achieves its purpose? And what kind of changes would you make as a leader and a manager of the UN to enable it to fulfil its vision for the UN? So that's special envoys. And then secondly, in relation to the UN development system, there's been significant reform in recent years, including the establishment of the resident coordinator system through the 2018 reforms, which both Iceland and Ireland have backed very strongly. As Secretary General, what approach would you support to deliver on the potential of these reforms and ensure the best coordinated UN approach at country level? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland. Please.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to the representative of Ireland for such an important question. Let me say that I have thought that if I am elected Secretary General, one of the first things that I will do is to call all my special envoys, all the special envoys of the UN, not only the personal envoys, but all the special envoys, and the SRSGs. So to hear what is happening on the ground, first thing, you know, when if elected, because we have to hear and we have to know exactly what is happening on the ground from those that are on the ground. And to take decisions, I know that there is a resolution, a revision of the peacekeeping part and the peacekeeping operation is coming, but I want to have my own views. And the views have to be informed by those that are in the field also. So apart from restructuring, the executive office of the Secretary General, I have said, I will call on all the SRSGs and special envoys first thing if coming into office. With respect, and the other part that I think that could be very important also in terms of peacekeeping is to bring together the planning capacities of DPPA and DPO. Right now, the planning capacities are apart. Each of them plan differently, and that is not coherent and necessarily, and is not coordinated. So also those planning capacities, I think, that have to come together, and that is a discussion of a reform that I would like to have with you. With respect to the RC system, I think that the objective of the RC system is very good. And the coordination on the ground is very timely. I cannot tell you how much time of my leadership, in my leadership roles, I have spent dealing with unhealthy competition and duplication. So if we can spare the countries of having to do with that, is a great step forward. But the only thing that I will ask from the RC system is to have a system that can bring the capacities of all the UN system to the ground. The organizations that have no boots on the ground are very important for precisely this moment of development of many of the countries, because it's the knowledge, is the capacity building, is the specialized policy advice. And that doesn't come only from the organizations that are on the ground. It comes from bringing to the country all the capacities of the system, on the best capacities of the system also. The RC system has to have a way to make that happen in reality, and that will make the system better.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand, also on behalf of Australia. followed by the next civil society organization, and then we come to the member states in their national capacities.
Thank you, President, and good morning, Rebecca. It's nice to see you again. Institutional credibility requires bold and principled leadership, including the ability to deploy the Secretary-General's good offices with political courage and effect. Institutional capability also requires a UN that is focused on upholding all three pillars of its work and translates early warning into early action. And finally, institutional capacity requires experienced and ethical management and realistic and fit-for-purpose mandates that sharpen effectiveness and delivery. So Australia and New Zealand's question to you this morning is, how do you think the UN80 initiative is working to align leadership, authority, and resources to restore confidence in the UN and enable it to deliver results? And how would you build on the UN80 initiative to make it more effective? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand. I give the floor to Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to New Zealand on behalf of New Zealand and Australia. Well, I think that I have been clear. The good offices of the Secretary General are essential, and I plan with very early action to make that clear and for the Secretariat to reflect the new priorities of the new Secretary General. With respect to the UN80, I plan to build on the outcomes of UN80. A lot of effort have gone into it, a lot of your effort have gone into it, and there is no reason to waste all the work that has been done. What I wouldn't like to inherit is very heavy processes going forward, because they will only drive an exhaustion with respect to reform. I want change. Decision has to be taken. More discipline from the Secretariat have to be exerted, and we need to move on. We need to take the decisions, make the reform, enact the changes that we want to have, and not have a heavy process forever with respect to the reform of the UN.
I thank you. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Nations Association in Lund. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Ms. Grynspan. As a youth leader from Sweden, I have been working with school children in Rwanda. I have seen how children's needs on the ground are often complex and deeply rooted in their daily realities. The following question is for you, and it is, from your perspective, what is the biggest structural barrier preventing development efforts from reaching our most vulnerable children? And if elected, what will you do to remove those barriers? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Nations Association in Lund.
Thank you very much to the youth representative of the UN Association. I was very moved by what you said, because we have seen that also on the field. I've been in the field so many times, witnessing the same thing that you are witnessing. And I have said already so many times, first, that humanitarian action should have no restrictions, should not be politicized, but also that the development work that we do in favor of the most vulnerable is the first thing that we have to protect. I can assure you that that is my commitment.
I thank you. Now we come to Member States' international capacity. I know that many Member States would like to take the floor, so I ask you again to be very short and sharp. The speaking time is 2 minutes for questions and also 2 minutes for answers. Like yesterday, we would add the 8 minutes we had at the beginning for procedural notes, so we would end sharp 8 minutes after 1 o'clock. The first speaker for the national statements is Ecuador. Please, distinguished representative, I give you the floor, followed by Djibouti, and the Philippines.
Apreciada.
Former Vice President Grynspan, we see that your vision focuses on social inclusion and institutional strengthening, as well as the environment. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the Development Bank estimated that the direct costs of violent crime in the area are around about 3% of GDP. How can you incorporate fight against transnational organized crime in your role? And what role would you give to the United Nations system to address the economic and social impacts? Now, we understand the work of UNODC in fighting transnational organized crime. And I'd like to ask your opinion about this, given the increasingly transnational complex nature of this scourge. I think it shows that it requires a comprehensive response from the multilateral system as a whole. And finally, yesterday, unsuccessfully, I asked for the floor at the 2 sessions following the rules that have been established. And so I must just finish by thanking the 3 candidates from Latin America and the Caribbean for their participation in these dialogues. This has confirmed our conviction that the time has come for someone from this region to occupy the highest post in global diplomacy. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you very much to the representative of Ecuador for your question. I think you saw how in my initial statement I made a point of referring specifically to organized crime and terrorism as very important, particularly organized crime, a very significant phenomenon in our region. The deaths that we see are not from conflicts between state, it's from clashes between the state and organized crime. And so I think the United Nations action has to be increased. And the support for UNODC has become essential support, but they're not the only organization. UNODC, for example, have a very important program for following the money to try to get to the bottom of the illicit financial flows.
Laws affect or finance the international and transnational organized crime and also terrorism, and that there is a link. So following the money is a very important part of the fight against transnational crime and terrorism. So the commitment of the UN with this agenda has to be very high and has to deepen, because it's important for many regions. It's not only wars, but this agenda.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Djibouti.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening these important and timely dialogues with the candidates. I would also like to thank Madam Grynspan for her presentation and ask the following questions. Your Excellency, as you may be aware, there is an urgent need for jobs in the world. Over the next 10 to 15 years, more than 1 billion people in developing economies will reach working age, and roughly half of them will be women. How will you align agencies such as the ILO, the UNDP, and the World Bank toward a common and measurable global jobs agenda? What is your strategy to turn the UN into a platform for large-scale youth employment partnerships, especially in Africa? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Djibouti. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Yes, one of the things that I celebrate that have happened in this under the Secretary General is the opening of the youth office in the UN and the agenda for youth and future generations coming as a central part of our discussions. And I think that that is a very important development that I will maintain. And with respect to the jobs agenda, that is the agenda, yes? Countries that are commodity dependent don't generate jobs for the next generations, for more educated youth. That's the case for many of our countries in the developing countries and, for example, for Africa. So diversification of the productive structure, the digital agenda, not only to boost consumption, is to boost productivity and production to be able to provide the new jobs that a very important new generation is demanding. And Africa has, if I am not mistaken, an average age below 20. And so this agenda, the youth agenda, not only education, but the youth jobs agenda, is an essential part of the stability for the future, because the demographic bonus really is a bonus if the people have opportunities, if the people will have jobs, if they can enter, you know, in more formal jobs and more quality jobs to the economy. When that doesn't happen, and you have what is called the democratic bonus, you are calling for instability and conflict. We can help the African continent not to fall into the trap and really to make the demographic bonus an opportunity for growth and prosperity in the future.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines, followed by Turkey and Paraguay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Grynspan. As chair of the like-minded group for middle-income countries, the Philippines would like to inquire how you believe the UN support to middle-income countries can be improved, considering that the majority of the world's poor continue to live in mix, including a strategic plan of action for mix and a dedicated focal point in the Secretariat, which the LMG mix have been consistently calling for. Likewise, how will you use expertise and experience in your previous positions in UNCTAD and UNDP in this endeavor? And in particular, how do you see the opportunities provided by UNAT to rethink and recalibrate and strengthen partnerships for and with mix throughout the UN? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Yeah, thank you very much. This has been, thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the Philippines for this question. I have worked in the agenda of the middle-income countries for such a long time, including my own country. And I believe that the middle-income countries are a very important part of our collective agenda. You cannot think or do climate change without the middle-income countries. You cannot face the problems and challenges that we have to face collectively, excluding a part, such an important part of the economy and of the membership of the United Nations. So for me, the agenda of the mix is also the agenda of the UN. How to rethink and recalibrate their involvement is a very important part. But I think since I was in UNDP, we are discussing this. I remember seeing the numbers, you know, when 4 decades ago, most of the poor live in low-income countries. Today, most of the poor live in middle-income countries. The poor didn't move. They are in the same countries, and they continue to be poor. So if we have a real agenda to combat poverty, if we have a real agenda for the challenges that have to be faced collectively, middle-income countries have to be part of it and are a very important part of the answer.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam Grynspan, thank you for putting forward your vision. As you have mentioned, we had the pleasure of working closely with you in securing the Black Sea grain deal. It was an outstanding success in recent mediation efforts. My question is, how would the organization achieve effective mediation under your leadership if you're selected, especially under the current budgetary constraints? And a second question, if I may. As one of the co-sponsors of the UN Alliance of Civilizations, we are interested to hear your views on fostering cooperation and tolerance, bridging divides and reducing polarization. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. Please, Ms. Grynspan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Turkey. I have to say that the Black Sea Initiative was possible because of the involvement of Turkey. And this is a very good example of how we have to work for the future. We have to work with clear objectives, and we have to partner with the actors and the new mediators that are that have such an important role in the different regions. And that's exactly what happened in the Black Sea Initiative. So the reasons why it was successful is because we partnered with the real actors in the region and important actors in the region, is because we talked to all the sides in the conflict, is because we had a small team that really was has a clear objective, that was agile, that could go everywhere, that could involve the UN in aspects of the mediation that were not common to the UN, to talk, as I said, to the insurers, to the shippers, to the private sector, and to navigate within a very constrained environment on the sanctions. So a lot to be learned from that experience, and thank you to Turkey for allowing and for being involved for that to be successful. It was an essential part of the success story. With respect to mediation, let me say that early engagement and mediation many times come when we have the ear to what is happening on the field. Many times our teams really know what is happening and the developments of early signs of a conflict and problem. I said before, for example, a systematic violation of human rights is many times the best indicator to know that a conflict is developing and to allow for early engagement and preventive diplomacy together with mediation. So I have talked about this, and it will continue to be very high in my agenda.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Paraguay, followed by the civil society organization Herald Foundation and Czechia.
Gracias. Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished Madam Grynspan, welcome to the General Assembly. Paraguay very much appreciates your candidature. A lot have been talking about how we appreciate this organization as a lighthouse and how can we increase its influence in this unprecedented world situation. You said that peace is endangered, but it's endangered because of very many factors. Organized crime, for example, cross-border, that was mentioned. Despite the efforts that countries have made and also the organization has made, the challenges in fighting international organized crime in all its forms continues to be an enormous task. And that's why, in this context, I'd like to ask you the following. I think that all questions and answers may have been put already, but let me still ask you, do you think that there is room to adopt measures to work with governments over and above the existing mechanisms that we have in order to counter this reality that has such devastating effects on our societies? And secondly, what importance do you give to regional organizations, the OAS, for example, in our hemisphere? Do you think that we can create synergies that would make their work in this context and in other contexts more effective? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Paraguay, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Paraguay. Muchas gracias por su
Thank you very much for your question. And as I said previously, international organized crime is really a problem for the entire region, for our entire region. And the UN programs with UNODC, UNCTAD, and UNDP in this area, I think are a good example of good coordination, but we have to be able to place this matter as a higher priority on the agenda, as something that is a matter of peace and security for our region. And when it comes to adopting measures to better work with governments, well, I would say that the UN can't face international crime unless there is cooperation between states, because quite clearly if the crime is transnational, then we need to have the cooperation of all countries involved. If we don't have good information, if we don't have a good level of cooperation, then transnational organized crime will be coordinating amongst themselves if states don't do that. And if we don't cooperate, we won't be able to overcome this phenomenon. With regard to the hemispheric regional organizations, I agree with you that we need to seek out the partnerships that we need. I know, for example, that a lot of work is being done in this area with countries and with regional organizations, and I think that this is something that we should certainly follow, and I hope that we can persevere with this task, which is very important for development and for peace and security in our region.
Muchas gracias. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Hauralde Foundation with a pre-recorded video and invite the Assembly to view the recorded video. Sound again. As yesterday, we wait for a second. I take 2 member states and then we see if we have the sound. I now give the floor to the next member states, the distinguished representative of Czechia, followed by Ukraine, and then we try the video again.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Dear Ms. Grynspan, in today's increasingly multipolar world, the United Nations remains indispensable as the principal forum for dialogue and collective action. In this regard, let me underline that the Czech Republic attaches great importance to the UN80 reform process. It is vital that the United Nations should emerge stronger, more credible, and more effective in delivering across all 3 pillars of its work. Against this backdrop, Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine represents a profound challenge to the core principles of the UN Charter, notably sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the prohibition of the use of force. In your view, how could the United Nations, and the Secretary General in particular, help advance a just, lasting, and long overdue resolution of the conflict in full accordance with international law? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Czechia. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much. Let me first agree with you on the essential role of the UN in this multipolar world. Multipolarity is not a choice, it's a fact. What is a choice is multilateralism. Multipolarity without multilateralism will push us towards fragmentation. Multipolarity with multilateralism holds the promise of a much more decentralized and equitable world. And that's why we have to work together to strengthen the UN. So let me agree with you also in your remarks with respect to improving delivery in the 3 pillars of the UN that I established as a principle in my opening remarks. And obviously, we all want a just and lasting resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. And we have to support in any way possible the capacity the process that is taking place in terms of the negotiation between the actors. And I really hope that the UN can play a constructive role in that process and that we can very quickly get to a resolution of the conflict on the benefit of the populations that are suffering so much from this war. So really thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine, followed by the civil society and the Dominican Republic.
Well, first of all, I wish to thank you personally, Madam President, for initiating this interactive dialogue with all the candidates for the post of the Secretary General. Ukraine praises your innovative and creative approach, highlighting crucial role of the General Assembly in the election process. Let us demonstrate that the GA will not remain a bystander. Madam Grynspan, I thank you for presenting your vision as potential SG with such an energetic approach. I don't think that my question will surprise you. You were the only SG candidate visiting Russia 2 weeks ago. And I must tell you frankly that this political trip to a UN member state waging the bloodiest war of aggression on the European soil since 1945 was received with very mixed feelings. So my question is very simple. If elected, which concrete steps would you as Secretary General take right now to put an end to this barbaric war and achieve just and lasting peace in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine, Ms. Grynspan. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to the representative, of Ukraine for the question. And let me be very frank with you. I think that we have to engage with all parts of the conflict. We cannot mediate if we don't engage. And we have to engage with all the members of the P5. That doesn't mean that we have to agree with them, but engagement is important. And the negotiations that are taking place today are very important for Ukraine. I was there, as you say. I visited Kiev several times when I was mediating in the UN initiative, in the Black Sea initiative. It was important for Ukraine because the country that was not able to export was Ukraine. And so we were able to mediate and have a very good outcome also for Ukraine. We did that with the support of Ukraine too. We talked to all the actors to be able to get to something that can be important in the path towards peace. If I will be elected Secretary General, I will do that again. I will try to use my good offices precisely to do that, to bring peace, to allow mediation, to talk to all actors, and to be able to, as you said, get a just and lasting peace in the conflicts that bring so much suffering to the civil population.
I thank you. As we are not sure whether the video is working right now, we move on with member states. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Dominican Republic, followed by the Maldives.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you very much, Madam Grynspan, for presenting to us your vision and for answering our questions today. In the context of the current review of UN peacekeeping operations, what do you think should be the main development in the peacekeeping and security architecture of the organization in order to better respond to future crises? And in this regard, as the UN is attempting to become more flexible when it comes to peacekeeping operations, hybrid operations, for example, authorized by but not led by the United Nations, for example, what principles and criteria do you think are essential to determine when these models are appropriate and when they need to be further structured to ensure that they are effective and legitimate? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Dominican Republic. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to the Dominican Republic representative for the question. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Well, in my vision statement, I did stress the developments in the peacekeeping architecture. I'm very aware of the hybrid modalities that we have begun to see. One of them is very clear. That's the modality that's just been approved in the Security Council for Haiti. In Haiti, we have a United Nations entity that is a unit that is supporting the gang suppression force. We have a political mission that will be addressing DDR in the future much more and engaging with the communities in Haiti. And so we are there in a situation where we don't have a UN peacekeeping force from the United Nations. So this is a new reality, and we have to analyze that new reality. And you're quite right. We need to see on a case-by-case basis which modalities are most appropriate for which situation. I don't think that we can have one-size-fits-all recipe for all conflicts, all situations. They're all different. They have different reasons for having emerged in the first place, and they need different responses from the international community. What's important here, I think, is the coordination with the United Nations, and increasingly this is Security Council resolutions that are needed in order for us to benefit from the infrastructure of the United Nations to support and also provide legitimacy, which only the Security Council has, according to the Charter, the power to provide. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representatives of the Maldives, followed by Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President and Madam Grynspan for the presentation this morning. Small island developing states now expect that Abbas for SIDS outcome should be reflected across the UN system. What accountability would you place on resident coordinators and UN country teams to ensure that this happens in planning, programming, and delivery? Second question, your vision calls for an integrated view of peace and development. For small island developing states, insecurity is often driven by climate impacts, maritime vulnerabilities, illicit flows of economic fragility rather than by conventional conflicts. How would you ensure that the United Nations better reflect this reality in its preventive, development, and country-level development engagements? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representatives of the Maldives. Please, Ms. Grynspan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of the Maldives. I have referred profusely about the agenda for the seats, the importance of Abbas, and obviously they have to be accountability of the resident coordinating system for implementation. As I said, this is not optional for the UN. Abbas and the conference and the mandates we receive from the conference are a mandate to us. It's not optional for the implementation of the Secretary General. What we have to assure is that the resident coordinators have the support and the capacities to really deliver on the ground. If I have to say something about what in the reform part about the kind of Secretary General that I want to be, is that I want to be the delivery Secretary General and to deliver result, to delivery on the ground. And with respect to the challenges of the seats, I have been also already referring to that. I think that the international financial illicit financial flows agenda is a very important agenda also for the seats, the maritime issues and the connectivity. I referred to that before. I have full understanding of it. I have worked on it. I have done a lot in UNDP and in UNCTAD on this agenda, and I will continue to be an important voice going forward.
I thank you. As we have 15 minutes left, we will see if we can hear 3 or 4 more member states in the remaining minutes, and we will also ensure that we hear the 5th voice of civil society. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone, followed by Haiti.
Thank you, Madam President. Because of time, I'll go straight to the question. Madam Grynspan, congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for your willingness to serve our organization in the High Office of Secretary General. The reform of the United Nations Security Council is a strategic priority for the African group. This question is a follow-up to the question that was posed by Mali on behalf of the African group. And I believe your answer may not have given weight particularly to the commitment made by heads of state and government in the Pact of the Future, where there was a commitment to address the historical injustice being perpetrated against Africa, to treat Africa as a priority and a special case in the reform process. In redressing the historical injustice and ensuring an equal seat at the table, in particular to address the peace and security issues relating to Africa, one of your priorities which you've alluded to earlier on, how would you use the convening power of the Office of the Secretary General and certainly the moral authority of the position to achieve this important commitment made at the highest level? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Sierra Leone and for the follow-up question. And I'm sorry I didn't answer it to the satisfaction before. Let me say very clearly, not only in the Pact of the Future, but also in peace and security, Africa is an essential partner for the UN. And I think that in peace and security, especially with respect to assess contributions in the peacekeeping missions, there is a resolution that has not been implemented. And I think that the effort of the Secretary General is to work with the African Union to see what have been the obstacles for that important resolution that Africa fought for so much, why it has not been implemented, and use the power of the SG for implementation. I think that is very important, and I am very aware of the case that we are discussing on. And with respect to the Pact of the Future and equal seat at the table and the moral authority of the Secretary General, you can count on it. I think that Africa, as I said, is a region that has developed capacities, has developed institutions, and that the partnership of the UN with Africa is a priority and a good case to show with other regions what we can do together. So you can count on my commitment with the African continent. I have, my last trip as a Secretary General of UNCTAD was to precisely the African continent for the African Union meeting, but also I was in Zambia and in Namibia with very important products from programs from UNCTAD that are being developed in those countries. I know the situation, I know the reality, I will be there.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Haiti, followed by Yemen, and then the civil society statement.
Madame President, permettez-moi en tant que...
Please allow me to, in my capacity as Minister for Planning in Haiti, to greet you and to welcome your remarkable journey as a multilateralist. We are experiencing a very dire security situation, growing poverty, and humanitarian urgency. Women live in permanent insecurity. They are victims of sexual violence by armed gangs Thousands of children cannot go to school, are being kidnapped, and the social services are collapsing. In this context, really, recovery of Haiti cannot be just humanitarian. It has to be also political, economic, social, and it has to be lasting. If you become Secretary General, what would be your vision to strengthen the UN commitments towards fragile states such as Haiti, not just in the humanitarian aspect, but especially when it comes to lasting stabilization, financing development, institutional strengthening, and restoration of democracy? How are you going to go about making sure that the vulnerable states are higher up on the international agenda, that they have access to financing, and that they're treated fairly by the international community? I thank you.
Distinguished Representative of Haiti, please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Haiti. Je vous remercie pour votre...
Thank you very much for your questions. Let me respond in English.
Let me again say that we have to make the implementation of the resolution of the Security Council a priority. BINU, that is the political mission in Haiti, has the mandate of institutional building and providing the conditions for lasting stabilization. I think that is very important to resource BINU in the right, with the right resources for them to be able to comply with the mandate. As I said before, I am very aware that the problem of Haiti is multidimensional. It's not only peace and security, it's humanitarian, it's political, it's development. And that's why the whole UN has to be involved. It's not only the gang problem, it's really the root causes of the problems in Haiti. And the development pillar has to be there, the humanitarian organizations have to be there, and the political part, as you referred to, has to be complied with, but we need to resource appropriately the institutions and organizations and devices, tools that we have put on the ground. So implementation and presence of the UN has to be fundamental for a lasting solution in Haiti.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen.
I thank you, Madam President. I would like to ask a question on humanitarian work to follow up on some questions already asked. Humanitarian crises are expanding, spreading from Yemen to Sudan, Ukraine, Palestine, and other areas of conflict. My first question: there are repeated criticisms stating that a large percentage of humanitarian funding is used on operational costs, while less money is reaching those beneficiaries. If elected as Secretary General, what are the practical measures that you plan on taking to guarantee raising the efficiency of humanitarian work and increasing and optimizing the work of humanitarian relief and its effects? Second question: in light of the great and increasing gaps in funding humanitarian response plans globally, what is your vision on on finding extra sources and sustainable ones to bridge those gaps? Third, as the dangers facing humanitarian workers are increasing, especially local staff that are facing detention or kidnapping in areas of conflict, in light of this, what measures do you intend to take to enhance their safety and guarantee their protection while performing their duties? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Yemen. Please, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to the representative of Yemen. Very important questions. First of all, in the humanitarian space, there is an ongoing reform that has been led by Tom Fletcher. And part of that humanitarian reform has to do with counting much more, partnering much more with local organizations to be a central part of humanitarian relief and humanitarian aid. I think that is a very important reform that we have to follow and that we have to support OCHA and the leadership that is exerting in the reform of the humanitarian work to precisely to do what you say, to keep most of the money for the aid and not for administrating ourselves. And more sources of financing are needed. We have heard the urgency and the call to finance the needs of the most important needs of humanitarian work. We have heard the intervention of Tom Fletcher in the Security Council, and our hearts really dropped when we heard the numbers, yes? More than 1,000 humanitarian workers have lost their lives in the last 3 years. We have to honor their memory, and we have to protect humanitarian workers in their honor, too.
I thank you. As we could not hear the video before, maybe also underlining the need for technical reform in this building for the next Secretary General, but also underlining not only our resilience, but also flexibility if we partner up, as you have mentioned, because civil society is partnering up with other civil society actors which send in their video from the other part of the world. So therefore, we will hear now the statement of the Haraldi Foundation by a civil society representative here in the room being read out. Thank you very much for your team-building spirit here, better together, and this will be also the final answer in this interactive dialogue for you, Ms. Grynspan, after we come to the closing of this morning dialogue. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. On the behalf of the Haraldi Foundation, I will read the following statement. Migrant women, especially those in an irregular administrative situation, face multiple forms of violence and exclusion with serious barriers to accessing basic human rights, protection, and economic autonomy. What concrete measures will you promote within the United Nations to ensure the effective protection of their rights and to prevent migration systems from continuing to reproduce situations of vulnerability and exploitation? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grynspan.
Thank you very much to civil society. And migration is a very complex phenomenon, yes? We have many forms that are intertwined when they happen. We have on the one hand people asking for asylum, and on the other hand we have displaced people, and on the other hand we have migrants, and the only convention that we have of protection is for refugees and for the framework of refugees. We don't have the same legal framework for internal displaced person or for migrants. And so it's the internal laws of the countries that regulate migration. Still, from a human rights perspective, we have to do whatever we can to protect the human rights of migrants, and especially we know, and I'm coming from a region where migration is a very part of our reality, especially with respect to the worst forms of violence. So the pillar, the human rights pillar and the development pillar have to be there to protect the human rights of women and migrants, according also with the Global Compact. That is the only consensus agreement that we have with respect to migration. But thank you for the question, and really a very important point to bring to this discussion. And if you allow me, Madam President, since this is the last question, I am about to faint. Let me really thank you for organizing this. Let me really thank all the member states that have been here, that have taken the time for these 3 hours of the interactive dialogue. I think that this, in the process of the selection of the Secretary General, is a very important participation of the General Assembly in the process. I really expect to engage with you in the next weeks, but I am really very happy to be here and to be a candidate for this great organization that we all want to strengthen and that we all cherish. Thank you so much.
By this, we have now come to the end of the interactive dialogue. I would also like to thank you, Ms. Grynspan, and all the participants, member states, and civil society for their contributions. Before adjourning, I would like to remind members that the next interactive dialogue with Mr. Macky Sall will take place this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this chamber. Have a good lunch, that nobody is fainting afterwards, and I see you at 3 p.m. sharp. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.